Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Pam, for that great introduction. I really appreciate it. Great to see everybody here. Thank you all. I am so pleased to be able to talk with you about this today. So, there we go. Okay. So this is going to be me speaking about my experience as a participant in the SPARK study and actually receiving a genetic result 5 years after I participated. Very unexpected and unbeknownst to me. So if you scan this code with your phone, this will allow you to ask questions in an app called Slido. If there's something you're not comfortable asking out loud, you can ask it anonymously, and I'll be keeping track of the questions on my phone. So I know we have the microphone going around at the end, but if there's something you don't want to ask out loud, you can do it this way. So feel free to scan this with your phones. I'll give you just a moment, if anybody wants to. Okay. Oh, I'll go back. How do I go back? There we go. Okay. All right, everybody good? Okay. So a little bit about me. Pam kind of covered all of this, and I won't go into too much of this, but I currently work as a relationship coach in the Rutgers Center for Adult Autism Services, where I started in March of 2020, which is a very strange time to start a new job. Because I was there all of 2 days, and then it was spring break, and then it was pandemic. But I've been there for all this time now, and I also am the president of ASCOT Consulting, my own organization, where I'm an autism sexuality advocate and consultant, and I work with people on the spectrum in issues related to relationships and dating, and other issues as well. And I was recently called the Taylor Swift of autism, which I think is the first and last time in my life I will be compared to Taylor Swift. It's a slight upgrade from Dr. Ruth, at least I'm getting younger. So make of that what you will. And I wear many hats. I sit on the boards of several different autism organizations, and I'm currently authoring my first book, which is called The Naughty Audie, which is a memoir of my experiences with dating as a woman on the spectrum. When I was thinking about this topic and thinking about my journey to getting this diagnosis, of course, I had to think back to where I began. And so this was me, at about age 10, 11, when I was first diagnosed, as was mentioned, with Asperger's syndrome at the time. This was in 1994. And Asperger's had just been added to the DSM, brand new. And it was such a rare thing, I think, to get officially diagnosed, especially as a girl at that time. So my parents, went from specialist to specialist. They had my hearing tested because they thought that my hearing, something was wrong with it because I wasn't listening to them when they told me what to do. Hearing was just fine. It was nothing to do with that. But there was so much of a struggle happening at school, happening with the bullying that I was beginning to experiencing. And what kind of kicked it all off was me coming home from school one day in about the 4th grade and taking off my backpack and saying to my mother, I feel like killing myself. And that sent her looking for help, what little help there was to be had. Because at the time, of course, nobody really knew what autism or Asperger's syndrome was. And so even though I received this diagnosis, not much changed. The fight was always with the school to get the supports I needed. The fight was always with other parents to get them to stop being jerks to me, basically. The fight was with the world, with feeling isolated from all that was around us. People talk about community, and community is not an innate thing when you're autistic or when you're the parent of an autistic child. And I grew up in a small town. I grew up on Long Island in Port Jefferson. Only 8,000 people, or so in the town. And so it's very noticeable when you don't fit into a community like that. And so those, in the moments after getting that diagnosis, nothing really shifted about my immediate situation. And the way that I saw myself also kind of didn't change too much because, again, all I knew was that I was different, and that different was bad and different was weird. This was what I was being told all the time. And so my peers' words became the words that I heard in my own head. You're a freak, you're a psycho, you're a retard, you're a loser. All these things supplanted any sense of self-awareness that I had. However, Amy Gravino got squashed down real quick. And getting the diagnosis didn't really change that. All it did was give us a label. But that ended with me going into my mother's room one night and saying, Mom, why do you have so many books that start with the letter A? Because she got her hands on every autism book that she could find. But that was the extent of really what was available. There just wasn't, especially with the internet now, the way things are. So that was how that sort of began, and just thinking about how much different it would have been if people had known about autism, if people did have an awareness and an understanding. Maybe it would have meant that I didn't hate myself for so long, and that self-hatred began at such a young age. No one should be in 3rd, 4th grade and absolutely, hating to look in the mirror at themselves. But that was how I felt every single day. And so thinking about all this, when the time came and I learned about Spark, I decided to participate in the study. And I remember it was 2016, and it was so simple. You spit into a tube and you mail it in. And I was really interested in Spark because of this idea of finding out about the genetic causes of autism, not to eradicate autism, certainly, but to help us better understand. To help us understand so that all the 11-year-old kids like me who are out there still struggling won't maybe have to go through what I went through. I wanted to promote that understanding. Even as I understood the outcry from so many people, the concerns, of course, about the concerns about eugenics and things of that nature, I knew that that wasn't where people's hearts lie behind Spark, because I met so many amazing people as I continued my journey with Spark and joining the Community Advisory Council, joining the Participant Access Committee, and then ultimately in 2020, I was invited to join the Scientific Advisory Board. And my background is I have a master's degree in applied behavior analysis, And so I was thrilled to be able to think more about the science behind autism and to bring my input as an autistic person with that lived experience to this, and that Spark was so willing to embrace that and to hear from people like me meant everything to me. But then, completely unexpectedly, in 2021, I got an email saying, "We have found a genetic cause for your autism." An extremely informal way of finding out some very formal, heavy news. I thought it was spam. I nearly deleted it. I mean, who would possibly think that such information would come in such an innocuous form and such an impersonal form to get such personal information? And so shortly after, a phone call happened with Dr. Wendy Chung, and the first things I remember her saying were, "Don't look up anything online about it, and here's a parent group that you could join to tell them what it's like to live with your diagnosis," which was Kleefstra syndrome 2. I said, "Well, I don't know what it's like to live with Kleefstra syndrome 2. I only know that's not how I identify." And of course I looked it up online, because how are you not going to do that? And per the National Institutes of Health, the definition is an autosomal dominant neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by delayed psychomotor development, variable intellectual disability, and mild dysmorphic features. And I began to, when I received the news, when I was in that phone call with Wendy, the other thing that happened was that I burst into tears. Uncontrollably, I began to sob because so many years were spent thinking that I was this failed, broken version of normal, that I was the girl who, by the time 3 months of school had happened, wound up getting sick every Thanksgiving because my body would shut down from all the stress that I was experiencing from the bullying. I was the girl who ran out of the classroom when a classmate's science experiment that was a volcano when it erupted in the classroom. I was the girl who ate lunch backstage because it was too overwhelming to sit in the cafeteria and no one wanted to be near me. And to know that I didn't do something wrong, that this wasn't something that I caused, that this is exactly who I'm meant to be, meant the world to me, to get that information. And it just broke me in some way, but in a good way for once. Sometimes it can actually be good to be broken because you know how to put yourself back together for once. And this time I did with this information. And thinking about what changed after that second diagnosis, well, the problem was that at the time there was a little matter of a pandemic going on. So I really didn't have the time to process that information, right? And the journey has been ongoing, Suddenly I had this information that helped me to put these threads together. And I love this picture because I know it can look as much like hanging on by a thread as it is like something coming together. And I think that was how many of us felt, how I felt at that time in 2021 with the world falling apart. But it became this thing of, well, how does this affect me? Who is Amy Gravino? Am I suddenly not the person that I thought I was? You know, is my is my chin, you know, a dysmorphic feature, or is it, you know, my father's chin? Are my thick eyebrows, you know, a part of my Kleefstra syndrome, or is it because my father's mother believed that you would have thick eyebrows if you rub breast milk on eyebrows? Were my protruding buck teeth a dysmorphic feature, or were they because my mother had buck teeth as well when she was a kid? So, you know, the diagnosis answered some things, and it told me what I am, but it didn't tell me who I am. And I think that's something that we tend to forget, is we think that a genetic diagnosis is the end of the story, but it's really the beginning. This journey kind of, once again, I found myself in the same place as when I was 11 years old, because, well, nobody knows about Kleefstra syndrome 2. Nobody really knows that much about what it is. We have very little information. And, you know, I'm not a little kid anymore. I'm an adult, but suddenly I'm in the position, I'm the one who has to inform others about my life, even though I never knew this information until now. And I don't know how to do that yet. It's been 3 years, and I am still, you know, it took me 20, 25 years to come to terms with being autistic and figuring out what that meant for me, and seeing it in some ways as an asset and not just as a liability. And now with this information, I've had some fear around it. I felt afraid of what this means, but I'm relieved, as I said, in a lot of ways, that I have this answer, and you know, just this full circle moment has just been, because looking at where I started, this is again, you know, with my parents when I was diagnosed, and thinking about, you know, how people said I would never accomplish anything, that I wouldn't finish high school, wouldn't go to college, I'd work in a sheltered environment. Now I have a master's degree, now I live on my own, although my parents still help me financially. And it's not that I've just defied what the so-called experts said, it's that I've defied what I thought, you know, the expectations I set for myself that were so impossibly high. And now, all these years later, again with my parents at their 50th anniversary in 2021, look at how far we've come, right? It would be so easy to say that getting the genetic diagnosis, you know, that's it. That's the answer to everything. But it might be the answer to why I've struggled with the things I've struggled with. It might be the answer to why I've had so many. And another thing about Kleefstra, they said short stature. I'm like, well, that's thank you very much for that one. And you know, while the genetic diagnosis might be the answer to some things, it's not the answer to everything. And it's not the thing that's going to tell me what the rest of my life is going to be like necessarily. If there's nothing else that you take away today, and all the fabulous speakers that are here today, is that I hope we remember that a diagnosis is not destiny, right? We get, again, that tends to be something, especially when it comes to autism. When someone's diagnosed as autistic, we think that that's the way that person's going to be for the rest of their lives. And it's not. We still have the opportunity to grow, to develop, to change, to find who we are through the help of a genetic diagnosis, hopefully. But let that not be the end. Let that be the start and a guide, something that guides us, rather than determines everything about us. So thank you all so much for your time and attention. This is my social media. If you scan this, you can follow me. And now we can go to questions.